Welcome to the world of Culture Pop with Steve Mason and Sue Kalinsky. Culture, comedy, movies, TV, tech, authors, trends, pop. This is the Culture Pop Podcast.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Culture Pop Podcast. I'm Steve Mason. It is Saturday, April the 4th. The year is 2020. We're all in quarantine. We are physically distancing. So normally, Sue Kalinsky would be here. Sue, one of my really good friends. She is not because of physical distancing. And Chris Morales, again, really good friend, engineer, normally produces the podcast. Can't be here because of physical distancing. By the way, I want to send a message to Sue. And this is such rough timing. But she had to put her dog Charlie down, which is so sad. And she's all broken up about it. Thank God she's got another dog. We keep two dogs. The idea is that if you lose your older dog, there's a younger dog to keep you company and help you get through it. So sending love and prayers to Sue and her husband Tom as they move on with life without their little buddy Charlie, who was 13 years old. So he lived a really good life. And a little downer start to the podcast. So apologize, because the whole point of this one is we're going to laugh. We're going to do a little comedy. We got a really cool guest coming up. Listen, guys, we are talking to Jacob Emrani almost every day during these crazy times. Jacob and I text back and forth. He and his family doing well. They're staying safe. And here's what it comes down to right now. People want certainty. They want answers, and they want them now. And people still getting into accidents, trying to deal with injuries. Jacob and his team are making it their mission to help in any way they can. So we want to encourage you, your friends, your family, to know that Jacob and his team are working 24/7 to assist you. They are, of course, working remotely, but completely connected and able to help you anytime, day or night. Accident questions, call Jacob. Injury questions, call Jacob. If you've already got a case and you want a second opinion, call Jacob. Call right away, 24/7. They are there for you. And by the way, it's not just Jacob. He's got a team of 50 people he's working with, all working remotely to help you. So be safe, stay healthy, but know if you need help, you can call Jacob 24 hours a day, 844-24-JACOB. That's 844-24-JACOB, 844-24-JACOB. Or remember, accident or injury, call Jacob. Emrani, call Jacob. And we appreciate Jacob's support to the podcast. It means a lot. So I came across a really cool, funny documentary this week. It is the story of a comedian named Eugene Mirman and the history of his comedy festival in Brooklyn. The documentary is called It Started as a Joke, and it is on demand and on iTunes right now. Eugene Mirman is here. Eugene, thanks a lot for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll talk about the movie, which I love. It's a lot of fun. I knew nothing about this particular comedy festival that you invented. But first, I want to talk a little bit about your stand-up career.
Sure.
When did you start doing stand-up?
I started the summer after high school in 1992, and I did it in college. I went to Hampshire College in Western Mass, where you could design your own major, and so I designed a major of comedy. And my thesis final project was a 1-hour stand-up act. And I did a lot of other stuff, like ran a weekly comedy show and did a radio show and, did a variety of things for it. But yeah, that's sort of, that's when I started.
So you invented a comedy class. What was?
Well, I didn't invent a comedy class as much as Hampshire College lets you design your own major, so that could be anything for anybody. But I took classes in acting and writing and film and sociology. There's a lot of independent studies. So for science, I did a paper on the physiology of laughter. For social science, I did a paper on Lenny Bruce. And so I did a lot of different things. But then for my final project, I wrote and performed and produced a 1-hour stand-up show.
So were you always funny?
I don't know. I mean, I did comedy.
Yeah.
I think I always loved comedy and did. I think growing up, I thought I was probably more strange maybe than funny. I don't really know. I guess I'd have to ask other people. But I loved stand up a lot as a kid. And then I think at some point, in high school, I realized that that's a profession that some people have. And it's possible to do that. And so then I started trying after high school.
So what were your biggest comic influences when you were a little kid?
I loved Emo Phillips. Emo was my favorite comic. And he has these amazing one-liners, but they're also sort of hidden in this strange persona. I loved Stephen Wright, Steve Martin. I loved Eddie Murphy's movies. I just watched tons of comedy.
So do you remember your first joke?
Yes. My first joke was, I think it's actually in the movie, but it's, what profession has the highest suicide rate? Some people think it's dentists, but it's actually kamikaze pilots.
Yeah, it still works. Still plays.
Yep. Solid. 18-year-old making a great joke about World War II.
Yeah.
In the 90s.
So what does it feel like? Because I've always had this in my head that someday I'd like to go out and try to. Normally the show is co-hosted by a comic named Sue Kalinsky, and I always joke with her that I want to go out and middle for her somewhere. Or open for her somewhere.
Sure.
What does it feel like to go out there and to just to bomb?
I mean, it's not a great feeling, but it's also very necessary. There's no version where essentially you're trying stuff and it works completely. So you have to just tweak things. So you try it and you try the way that you imagine it would work, and then you change stuff, and sometimes it totally connects, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes you have to fix a thing, sometimes you can never fix it. A lot of it in terms of when you first start, like when I first started, I would shake and I was really, really nervous. I think now, to a degree, if you do a joke and it doesn't work, but you're kind of comfortable with failure, then audiences are largely comfortable. It's really when the performer is incredibly uncomfortable and the audience is uncomfortable that it, is particularly, I think, awkward.
Yeah. Describe your first night on national TV. You did Conan.
I did Conan. Yeah, I was at the time I lived in Boston, and they would come. They would travel the country looking at acts in different cities, and I'd been auditioning for them for a year and a half or two. And then just one day I got a call and they were like, "Are you free this week?" And this is, I think around 2000 plus or minus a little. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm free Friday." They were like, "Well, we might need you to do stand up." And so they were just like, "Find a place to practice sets." And so I did that. And, a few days later they called and they were like, "We're going to have you come to New York and do a show and do the show." And so, they flew me to New York. A guy with like a sign with my name on it met me at the airport, I think at the airport. And it was just, it was crazy. And then performing, was amazing. Yeah.
Do you remember it, or is it just a blur?
Yeah, I mean, I remember. I remember it. I remember some of the jokes. I think they're also on my first album, and maybe on my some of it on my half hour for Comedy Central. I think a lot of it is like, it's this thing you're trying to do, and you do it, and then you realize sort of like that, that being on TV once or even 10 times isn't like you can pay a month's rent, and that's not enough to draw audiences, and you start seeing like, that like a career is like, decades of it, of doing all this, that you have these like milestones, and it certainly is like validating in terms of people who, wonder why you're doing a thing. And then if you're like on TV, they're like, oh, that makes sense. That's reasonable. And then they believe that you're a comic, I guess. But it was wonderful, and it was like such a great break.
So you started a comedy festival in 2008.
Yep.
That's the subject of the documentary. It started as a joke, which is out there, and it's on demand and on iTunes. And I got a chance to watch it this week and loved it. What's the idea? What was the idea of the festival?
I mean, it was basically me and a friend, Julie Smith, who directed the documentary and also produced the festival and a weekly show with me in New York. I one night was joking around that I was going to do a festival just of the Eugene Mirman Comedy Festival and do a lot of silly things. And then I think like the next day we were like, oh, maybe we should try to do this. And so Julie and I put on this festival, and it was really fun. And we kind of kept doing it every year for 10 years.
So at one point, the festival is described as a bunch of oddballs, a collection of oddballs, or a festival for weird comedians. I
feel like Reggie Watts said that. That's fair.
So what made them odd? What made them oddballs?
I mean, I think it was just that, half of it is just who they are and what their acts were, and then some of it is, they are or aren't odd. I don't know. Like, I wouldn't try to specific. I think that it was just like a lot of people who were goofy and had sort of unusual acts, and then some people who were very much straight stand-ups. So, I think it'd just be that the number of people who had sort of odd, funny acts was a higher percent than maybe other festivals.
So Janeane Garofalo at one point says she isn't a good joke writer, which sounds odd. But how can you be a stand-up without being a good joke writer?
Well, it's funny that she says that. I think that she, I think it's that she doesn't think of herself that way, in the same way that people would say, would often describe me as not being like a setup punchline comic. But I guess I would say that like I would do a thing where I have like a setup, and the setup is that like I got a parking ticket in a city for a reason that I think is unreasonable. And then the punchline is I wrote a long letter and bought an ad in a newspaper making fun of that town in their town.
Right.
So then the punchline is this long letter. So it's not like, so it's not a setup punchline, I guess, the way that somebody would think of it, but I certainly think it's a setup punchline. So I think in that same sense, like Janeane Garofalo has a really funny set and is really funny in her comedy set, and she probably thinks of it as, more observations or not exactly setup punchlines, but I mean, I think they're very funny jokes. So I don't know. I think she probably also means that she's not like a good joke writer in the sense of like she's not writing, the kinds of jokes that like, like Stephen Wright or Mitch Hedberg or somebody would write, these sort of like tight one-liner jokes. But it's sort of more conversational.
So take me inside this moment. There's a story that you once walked into a restaurant, grabbed a pork chop off somebody's plate, took a bite, said it was terrible, and announced you were leaving the establishment.
Yes, I think that's not actually that is a version, but I think that what actually happened was it was John Benjamin. It's sort of when we met. We had all. I used to be roommates with Brendan Small, who did Home Movies and Metalocalypse later on. When we lived in Somerville, and we used to do a show at the Comedy Studio at the Hong Kong at the time, and now at Beau Market. And we did a show that night, and John Benjamin came and Lauren Bouchard came, and John did a bit where he was, where I think throughout the night he said he was a local DJ who was going to award $20 to the worst comic of the evening. And then like later I stayed at the Hong Kong after the show, and Brendan and Lauren and John all went to this nice French restaurant a few miles away, and I later went to meet them. And actually what I think happened was their kitchen had closed and I was hungry, and so I went across the street and bought French fries and came back with this large box of French fries to this nice French restaurant.
Right.
And the chef, who they were all friends with, very kindly made this plate of these Cuban sandwiches that he was very well known for. And so he came out with this plate of sandwiches for everybody. And then I took one of those sandwiches and I bit it, and I was like, this is disgusting. And jokingly, I think, threw it on the ground. But there were many more sandwiches. And
Yes.
then we all hung out and then made TV shows together. So I think, but like John also has his version, and I feel like that's how I remember it. So yeah.
So every year the festival had a theme, and you really focus on drunk night.
No, well, every show had a theme. The festival was a bunch of different shows, and yes, there was a show in New York called Talent Show that was an amazing show that had a different theme every time. And one year at our festival, they did the drunk show, and it was what it claims to be.
So, is there a recording of the entire drunk show?
There is, I believe there is a recording of the entire drunk show, yes.
And have you watched it back? Is it funny?
I have not. There are a few clips in the movie of it, and there's Ira Glass talking about getting blackout drunk.
Yeah. What are some of the other themes that you had for shows?
Well, I mean, we had a lot of shows at the festival with sort of silly names, where we had, I think we had comedians, an evening of comedy from people with black glasses. And we had just like a lot of like, this person will be, either I think a successful or a copywriter or an audience coordinator in a few years. I don't remember all the names of the different sort of silly shows, but we had lots of silly shows.
So through the documentary, we follow you and your little boy, Oliver, and your wife, Katie, who is battling cancer. And we find out by the end she does not survive it. She passes away.
Yeah.
But you tried to do cancer comedy along the way. Sort of describe that.
Yeah, well, in general, my stand-up, though it isn't necessarily personal, is often stuff that's from my life and then, interpreted in, whatever way I do. And, Katie and fighting cancer and sort of living with cancer and living with terminal cancer had become, a huge part of our life for, 9 years, basically. With the first few being, a cancer diagnosis that she recovered from, and then a year and a half later it returned as stage 4 cancer. And so, I think, and we had moved to Massachusetts, and we had a son, and we were, very much of the mind of living life and trying to do what we could, even, under, very sad circumstances. And trying to find what joy we could. And I think that as Julie and I talked about making this documentary, about the festival for the final year of it ending, it also just seemed like part of the reason that it was ending was that our lives were changing and my life was changing. And also I had wanted to try to find a way to sort of find humor, in all of this. And the truth is, Katie and I would joke around all the time, so it's not that it was sort of very normal in our life to joke around about it, as I think lots of people suffering from tragedies with each other joke about things like that. It was more trying to figure out how to do it on stage and talk about it. So I did try to do that.
So Kristen Schaal said something. She's brilliant, by the way. Kristen Schaal's fantastic. She said something about really personal comedy in the documentary. She said if you turn something personal into comedy and it's not funny, it makes the wound deeper. How do you feel about that?
I mean, it adds. Well, I feel like it adds failure to sadness, I guess. I think that is true in the sense that there is an inherent risk to trying something that is, that is hard. Like, obviously bombing with a joke about a dentist is not as sad as bombing with a joke about something that means a lot to you. But at the same time, that's also one way to potentially have something that connects and reaches people. And so, it feels like in the grand scheme of things, a perfectly reasonable chance to take where, the risk is, of course, you feel bad and sad, but if it works, you've connected with people and maybe provided relief or joy for somebody.
So as I watched the documentary, I thought, well, why end the Eugene Mirman Comedy Festival after 10 years? Like, was it, why did you end it?
Well, part of it was when we first started it, Julie and I lived in New York City, as did most of the comedians who would perform at it. And over the years, many of them moved to Los Angeles. We moved to Massachusetts and, to different towns, but not far from each other. And we had kids. And I think to produce a festival like that, it just didn't make sense as part of our lives. We still work together on things. We made this movie and we'll, maybe start a small record label and we'll still probably put on shows and do things together. But in terms of the amount of work it takes to put on the festival, especially if you're, people used to be able to just take the subway to the shows,
right,
and take a cab. Now it would be people flying in hotels, and it's just, a level of production that would make sense if for some reason we wanted this to be like our annual business or something.
Yeah.
But we were largely doing it for the joy of it, and so it just didn't make sense exactly. But that isn't to say that it would never make sense or that we wouldn't do events or something. We just probably wouldn't try to put on a festival of this scope because it would be hard to do and not quite make sense. Like we would need to figure out childcare, which, 10, 12, now 12 or 13 years ago, we wouldn't have had to.
So how's life for you now?
Well, it's very pandemic-y.
Yeah, no, it is. You're right.
It's very strange. I mean, Katie died, a little over 2 months ago now. And, I was just very focused on making sure Ollie was okay and, talking with him about everything and, all of this stuff. And then all of a sudden we're just switching gears and there's a pandemic and we can't leave, we can go for walks and stuff. And, we have a yard and there's a swing set. So there's, it's okay, but it's very weird. And I also feel so sad for people who, we got to have a memorial and, we got to be with Katie and her friends came and, it was very hard, but we weren't alone. And now with COVID-19, I feel like people are, in rooms alone and the places where they're not, self-quarantining yet, where they don't think it's coming for them, it's going to be a disaster. And so my heart breaks for the people who, are going to be blindsided by this because I don't think they are taking it seriously enough. And then also for just, in general for everybody, because it's going to be terrible. But so I go between that and I guess cooking things.
Yeah,
and
right.
occupy my time, and also just playing with Ollie, basically, and watching TV. I mean, I'm also just trying to sort of get through the next 3 to 18 months or whatever it's going to be.
How's Ollie? How old is Ollie now?
So he's 3.5 now.
And there's no way he has no understanding of what's happening, right?
Yeah, not really. I mean, he knows that like he was going to school and now, he's not, and we don't go to any restaurants because they're all closed. And he vaguely, I told him about germs, but he's mostly just fine playing. And in a sense, he's like, he gets to stay home and we play and I don't go anywhere. So I think he's a few weeks out from being like, why won't anyone sell me a croissant?
Yeah, right. So, how are you filling up your time? Are you binging anything?
I mean, a lot of it is just taking care of Ollie. And then, yeah, I mean, I watched Tiger King, as many people have.
What'd you think?
I mean, I think it's sad and crazy. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the other version, where like if somebody's like, I mean, yes. I mean, it does make me want to open a really terrible zoo at my house.
It is weird that everybody, I mean, this week on my radio show, we talked to the president of the Los Angeles Dodgers, and we talked to the head coach of the Lakers, and both of them had watched Tiger King. It's just weird that everybody has caught that show at the same time, isn't it?
Well, I don't know when it came out, but I mean, I had a bunch of friends say like, oh, you should watch this. And I didn't, I was, not watching anything in particular. I've mostly been watching like all the Marvel movies in order.
Yeah, sure.
That's what I've been doing. So yeah, yes, I think it's just that it came at a time when everyone is trapped and looking for confusion and sadness in their life.
Looking for people that have it worse.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, listen, Eugene, I appreciate you doing this, taking a couple minutes. The documentary is great. It's called It Started as a Joke. It's on demand and on iTunes right now. Wishing you and Ollie all the best. Stay safe, and thanks again for doing this.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks a lot.
Accident or injury, call Jacob and Ronnie. Call Jacob.
Hey, it's Mace. If you or a loved one is injured in any kind of accident, please don't wait. Call Jacob immediately for a free consultation. That's right, free. When an accident happens, it can turn your world upside down, so put the best on your side. Jacob doesn't even get paid unless you win. First name, first thought, first call, Jacob. After an accident, 24 hours a day, call 844-24-JACOB or visit calljacob.com.
Call Jacob.
There you have it, Eugene Mirman. It is a fun documentary. We all need a fun documentary right about now about comics, and it features people like Bobcat Goldthwait and Jeanine Garofalo and Kristen Schaal and Kumail Nanjiani and Jim Gaffigan, on and on and on. So it's called It Started as a Joke. So we're doing the Culture Pop podcast from my house now, and we've got it technically set up to be able to do all this stuff by Skype. So we're going to do more of these. So please subscribe, rate, and review. They will come out probably every couple of days. So keep listening. We'll try to get Sue on the next podcast. Check in with her, see how she's doing. Thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you on the Culture Pop podcast soon.
Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you next week for an all-new episode of Culture Pop.